Very briefly, welcome everyone. This is part 2 of me ranking over 100 Treehouse of Horror segments, taking us right up to the current season in anticipation of Halloween. Check out part 1 if you haven't already, but for now, I'm going to jump right into this video starting with season 11, and I Know What You Diddily-Iddily-Did. I was going to praise this segment for being werewolf-centered, considering werewolves are another classic Halloween monster we haven't seen yet, while also pointing out it doesn't really function as much of a parody of I Know What You Did Last Summer. However, having actually just watched it, it's kind of the opposite upon reflection. Most of it plays out very much leaning into the whole Hookman thing, and the Simpsons trying to cover up the murder, and honestly, Homer covering up the murder is the funniest part of the segment. The werewolf reveal only happens right at the end. It always left an impression with me because when I first watched it, my sister was really scared of werewolves, and that kind of rubbed off on me such that I think of this as being a werewolf episode when it's barely about that. I guess I could hold that against this episode, kind of speaks to a lack of focus, but other parts of it are really funny, which is great. Returning back to my rankings, I'm going to place this one below King Homer and above Bad Dream House. Feel free to pause now to refresh your memory of my ratings. Stretch Dude and Clobber Girl, Stretch Dude and Clobber Girl, that's Desperately Xeeking Xena, is a great episode, mostly because of all the segments so far, this is the one I'd most want to see them return back to. I mean, obviously there's plenty of superhero media, too much now, but seeing Bart and Lisa in this role working together is really entertaining. Also, having Comic Book Guy as a villain called The Collector works great. Oh, and that musical intro is fantastic, and I get it in my head more often than I'm prepared to admit. I guess I could point out that this isn't scary, but that's more often been the case than not for these segments. What it is though, as already said, is a lot of fun, and indeed really funny. There's a reason why this is the segment I'd most want them to return back to, and for that reason I can't rank this lower than The Thing and I. Life's a Glitch, Then You Die pretty much had to be made in anticipation of the year 2000, just to keep people motivated. My parents were computer programmers and had to deal with some Y2K compliant stuff themselves. It's nice to see what could have otherwise been. I do give this segment credit for being made when it was and capturing a very specific concern for a very specific time. I'm not sure I love the ultimate conclusion being them flying into the sun. You'd think there's plenty they could have done dealing with the actual apocalypse on Earth. Still, at least they got to dunk on a load of B-list celebrities. The main thing elevating this is its time capsule quality. With that said, it still ranks quite low between How to Pay and Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores. Ghost Dad, or Ghost Dad as it's officially called, is a very simple story. Homer dies and then has to do one good deed to get into heaven, which I know that's not how heaven works, but whatever, that's the premise. The lead up to him dying is actually my favourite part, the way the horoscope is explicitly saying he'll die, and yet he seems completely unfazed by it even as he experiences several life-threatening situations. The main issue is that when he's trying to get into heaven, it's not really that funny, and it definitely doesn't feel like Halloween. I mean, it's still The Simpsons, so it's not exactly unfunny, but my memory of the segment before watching it just now had me feeling I wouldn't be that impressed, and indeed I wasn't. So again, obligatory disclaimer that this is still good. We're yet to have a bad Treehouse of Horror segment, but I can reveal we have a new addition to the bottom of the rankings. I like how Scary Tales Can Come True leaned into the fact that fairy tales are basically just horrors. Lots of people dress up as witches for Halloween, and witches are all over the place in fairy tales. And with that in mind, this segment is honestly pretty brutal. What with Goldilocks being mauled by two bears and the witch being burned alive, things like this help to add a little bit of tonal variation. This really isn't spooky, but it is gory, and that's something that makes an episode stand out. It's not super funny. My favourite bits are when Bart just combines the porridge, way to zing a fairy tale from 200 years ago. Also, when it's revealed George Cauldron is a real person.
Give her another 20 minutes.
Yeah, but the concert's at 8.
In terms of ranking, I'd probably put it above Hungry Are the Damned, but below The Monkey's Paw. Maybe it's my enjoyment of Finding Nemo, but I've always found The Night of the Dolphin oddly quaint. There's something so nostalgic and simple about the idea of living at sea, and seeing defeated humanity just floating there seems really relaxing, as long as you don't think about the terrifying dark nothingness below. Obviously, it's a very silly premise on so many levels. Dolphins are clearly adapted to swim in the sea. We outnumber dolphins by orders of magnitude. There's nothing about it that's scary, which is probably why I find the ending so chill. As for humour, it's by no means hilarious. When I was a kid, I found the scene where Snorky tries to talk really funny, but it was only funny the first time I saw it. The final battle is entertaining, and the broad idea of an aquatic species that was supposed to live on the land making war against humanity is interesting, and it works for a quick, fun little Halloween Halloween segment. Overall, I'm feeling that this is better than Starship Poopers, but worse than the Genesis tub. Hex and the City is so stupid in a way that makes me absolutely love it. It's been a while since I've involuntarily laughed out loud at the jokes in these segments, but here there were several. The guys selling puppies and pretending they're babies, when the gypsy clearly recognizes Homer and he says, "I know you don't remember me," and when Homer is told saying he's sorry will bring Bart back to life and he chooses not to do it anyway. The whole ending wedding is just so dumb, all these random fantasy creatures showing up to watch a gypsy and a leprechaun get married. I also like the fact that this segment is making fun of both gypsies and the Irish, the two ethnic groups against which every Englishman is allowed to be prejudiced. It's the law. The episode definitely isn't scary in being so silly, although it does have some sense of weight to it with a few key people dying. Overall for me, the silliness absolutely makes this segment, and I might annoy some more grumpy people in saying I really like it, but I don't care. Now let's annoy those people even more by ranking this above Easy Bake Coven and a whole load of classic Treehouse of Horror segments, but still below The Thing and I. House of Wax is also a lot of fun. Not only does it have funny moments, especially with Homer, and also everything about Pierce Brosnan's performance, but it genuinely has a sense of excitement. Like that moment when Homer is shredded by the garbage disposal is awesome. It feels like something you'd expect to see in a serious horror movie. In fact, this segment kind of ruined 2001: A Space Odyssey for me. I assumed, based on the presence of a Howl-like character here, that 2001 was going to be much more of an exciting thriller, largely about a computer killing the inhabitants of a spaceship in elaborate ways. Instead, it's about, a big cube. The praise I'd give to this segment is that I'm really annoyed that as far as I can tell, there's no piece of sincere media similar to it. If this was a much more direct parody of a film, I would definitely watch that film and probably enjoy it. This is another really strong segment from this episode, and I'm going to have to rank it pretty high. Probably below Time and Punishment, but above Desperately Seeking Xena, and decidedly towards the top spot. So, spoiler alert, I think that Treehouse of Horror 12 is randomly really good. I say randomly because it's nestled amongst a load of episodes I just think are fine, but I like every single segment here quite a bit. One reason I've tried to occasionally reference what work is being parodied is that I've heard some people complain that Wiz Kids isn't much of a parody of Harry Potter, but I don't think that's really important in my view. Mostly the premise they're rolling with here is that this is a school for learning magic, which was not invented by J.K. Rowling, and is something they got some pretty good jokes out of. I especially enjoy watching Milhouse fail at magic. I also of course like seeing Mr. Burns in an antagonistic role, especially when he sucks Bart up through the hand dryer, which became a vague fear of mine after seeing this episode. Overall, there isn't anything I'd want more from an episode like this. Some jokes about a school that teaches magic, and a basic evil scheme from Mr. Burns as a sorcerer to be thwarted by the kids. I'd say they do a good job delivering on both those things. Still, it's slightly worse than the other two segments from this episode in my view, so I will rate it below Clown Without Pity, but above Fly vs. Fly. Send in the Clones is another very dumb, but very fun episode. I mean, it starts off with Homer being excited by the daily visit of the Hammock Man, presumably he comes from the Hammock District. The opening is actually very non-Halloween-y, with it mostly playing off the fantasy of having a bunch of slaves to make your life perfect, which would be pretty neat. And there's some good comedy from just how dumb these clones are. I didn't even know there was room for Homer to be even dumber, but here we are. Things only get horrific after Homer, uncharacteristically for one of these segments, decides maybe it's a bad thing that Ned was killed. After this, things get particularly dumb, with the army not being able to just shoot the clones even though there's a pretty obvious limitation to how fast they can repopulate, and then obviously it's revealed that Homer is so stupid he died alongside the clones. Oh, on that note, the big shot of the Homer clones is funny. Overall though, this segment is pretty fun but not one of my favourites. I'd rank it below How to Pay, but above Life's a Glitch. The Fright to Creep and Scare Harms is quite the title. Really weren't holding back with the wordplay on that one. I've liked this episode since the first time I saw it. It's legitimately intense when you see Billy the Kid's hand reach out from his grave, cheering the fact that Springfield has gotten rid of their guns. The main comedy comes from the way these cowboys terrorize the town with their cowboy ways, especially the most terrifying cowboy of all, Kaiser Wilhelm.
Yippee whippy whippy! Okay, he's in.
I still quote, "That's piano, I said piano," quite reliably when I hear someone playing the piano. It's actually quite a good way to communicate the specific way you want them to play. The ending is a little bit silly though, the way that Professor Frink just jumps in with a Deus Ex Time Machina and then Homer just goes back in time and they shoot all the cowboys that way. The final reveal of another future Homer coming back and getting shot is pretty funny though, and ends on a positive with Moe getting some caveman hookers. In terms of ranking, I'm thinking just above Bad Dream House and below I Know What You Diddily-Iddily-Did. The Island of Dr. Hibbert feels really short and sweet. I wasn't expecting it to end so abruptly, but I guess it makes sense when the resolution is so obvious. Who wouldn't want to return to being a monkey? You ever seen that nature documentary where those lemurs get high on poison millipedes and just chill in a tree. I like Dr. Hibbert as a character, and it's kind of hilarious that they don't even try to present him as the bad guy. Homer enjoys the animal sex, everyone enjoys being an animal. The only person who really loses out is Professor Frink, but at least his death was funny. Other than that, everybody wins. It's also quite entertaining to see what animals people end up becoming, even though for a lot of it there isn't too much logic. Still, that this is so short means it can't be ranked that high simply because there isn't much room to really excel. So I'll rate it below Life's a Glitch but above Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores. For a quite short segment, it does make good use of its time. The big interesting thing about Reaper Madness is that it's similar to the Family Guy episode where Peter becomes Death, which aired several years earlier. I don't really care about stealing ideas, especially since Simpsons and Family Guy are such different shows overall that even if they cover the exact same idea, they'll take it in different directions. This episode focuses mostly on Homer's jerk-ass personality manifesting in him as Death. The way he eagerly kills lots of people and only really balks at the idea of killing somebody he personally likes. What a twat. It also has some quick jokes early on, like the Benny Hill chase routine, which I found really funny as a kid, and then providing a brief look at what the world looks like without death. The ending is honestly very dumb though. Homer outruns God on a motorcycle. That's ridiculous. I'm actually going to rank this segment dead last, but we're still not at the point where my last place ranking is even close to being a segment I'd actually consider bad. What I appreciate about Frinkenstein is that it functions as a pretty good spotlight episode for Professor Frink. That his dad was an Indiana Jones type adventuring scientist who was always disappointed in his more bookish son is a great bit of backstory, and I consider that canon even if these episodes in general aren't. Also, obviously it's funny that he's played by Jerry Lewis, and his rampage is actually entertaining and horrific. I've always really liked the scene of him just stealing everyone's brains at the Nobel Prize ceremony, and it's quite shocking when it's revealed that his dad is dead from a shark bite. The segment is also reasonably funny. My favourite joke is the fact that the only thing holding Frink back from reanimating the dead is that having to constantly change between a hammer and a screwdriver really annoyed him. Underrated joke, honestly. So, for being the only segment so far that substantially advances on a character and adds some interesting backstory, I want to give this a fair bit of kudos. In terms of how that kudos translates into an actual rating, my inclination is to say that this is better than the Omega Man, but worse than Homer Cubed. Stop the World, I Want to Goof Off is as funny a segment as you could imagine from that title. I enjoy every moment of Bart and Milhouse messing with people, which is good since that's literally the entirety of this segment. It made me wish I had a magic watch, although the fact that you age while time stops is a bit of a catch. Can't spend too long with time stops or else you're just going to age faster than everyone else. I'd say the episode is more fun than funny. I can't think of any moment that actually made me laugh, and it's definitely not scary. So I guess I'll rate it just above Send in the Clones and below Hell to Pay. I don't have that much to say about the Ned Zone. It's fairly middle of the road, definitely not massively funny, and not scary either, but there's nothing about it to really dislike. I think Ned's character works well for this story, and it's good the way they play off his conflict with Homer. Homer is a massive jerk in this segment, but what's new? It's sort of entertaining seeing the way people die, although it makes little sense that they all die almost immediately after Ned sees their death. It's kind of clever the way Ned ends up fulfilling his vision, like the Minority Report. Overall though, I'd say since I don't love this episode, I'm going to rank it below Starship Poopers. The best thing about 4 Beheadings and a Funeral is their British accents. They're just so good.
I'm a proper Cockney flower girl, I am.
I wish I could talk proper British like what they do. This segment mostly just has a pretty solid plot. Indeed, it's hard to evaluate it because I'm just chilling and watching it unfold. They don't really have much time for anything scary or anything massively funny, although this is definitely more funny than scary. Instead, the real question is, who is the mutton chop murderer? Still, I think there's an inherent flaw in deciding to make your 5-minute short story a plot-heavy mystery. There's not much room to explore it. As such, I guess I'll rank it below the island of Dr. Hibbert. The ending to In the Belly of the Boss is really unpleasant. The idea of a human being expanding to full size inside of you? No thanks. With that said, the actual real ending is incredibly stupid with the dance number. The idea of entering the human body is obviously a fun premise, but it's not an original one, and other stories have done it better. There definitely are entertaining moments here, but overall this episode feels pretty average. The only big moment I praise would be this moment. This is the last segment of season 16, which is when I believe the show officially crossed the line to being an overall bad show. So based on that logic, it should be all downhill from here, and in that spirit, I'd rank this pretty low. In fact, almost in the bottom spot, just above Reaper Madness. I enjoy the opening for this episode, but I'm not going to really be reviewing those. Anyway, the best thing about Bartificial Intelligence is the way it inverts the conflict of the movie it's based on, which I have seen, but so long ago I only remember the basic gist of it. Obviously in the original, the robot kid gets abandoned after the real son shows up, but in this one, it's Bart who gets abandoned.
Hope that somewhere deep in your databanks, you process fond memories of us. The sad part is, there were times when I actually had feelings for you.
These Halloween segments really like to lean into Bart being hated by his own family and replaced. Most of the episode is about Bart being annoyed by how much better David is than him, while the ending obviously features Bart turning himself into a cyborg in order to kill David, and then they wrap up with kind of a weird Exorcist parody, which I'm including as part of this segment. So the ending's a bit weird, but actually quite funny. I always laugh at the way Bart just cuts through David and Homer. He does kind of justify why people hate him though, considering he betrays and mutilates the robots who take him in when he's alone. What a jerk. Overall though, this episode is fun enough that I can rank it reasonably high, like above Hell to Pay. Actually, that's not very high at all, but that's because we're still at a point where a majority of these segments I've ranked so far have been great. Indeed, we're still at a point where even the bottom spot is a perfectly enjoyable segment of which I have no major criticisms. I spoke for a little while about the previous segment, so I guess I can justify breezing through my assessment of Survival of the Fattest. It's always bothered me the way that so many people just get killed in bulk, but I guess time was a factor. I also wouldn't say it particularly advanced on the original source material. While I usually like Burns and Smithers as a combination, for some reason this segment didn't have as much in the way of character-themed humour. There were some funny moments, but not any worth making particular note of. The best joke was the one right at the beginning about how Bart killed a hobo. I'll rank it above Starship Poopers and below Night of the Dolphin. I've Grown a Costume on Your Face is fine. I like the opening, especially when it's revealed the witch is a real witch and Sideshow Mel says,
Burn her! Gift certificate!
Seeing everybody acting out being their costume is entertaining. I wonder how Chief Wiggum would feel about being Jared from the Subway ads now. When you watch a whole load of these segments back to back, you start to realise how pointless they are, because you watch them, a premise is set up, and then a few minutes later it's over. Not that I'm having second thoughts about reviewing over 100 of them or anything. But seriously, like, you see them in their costumes, and that's fun, but as soon as you've seen it and taken it in, the segment's already over. I guess all this is to say the only real lasting positive these episodes can have is if they really make you laugh or in some way leave a big impression. And it's been a while since we've had a segment that leaves a big impression, so get used to me ranking them all towards the bottom to get just as monotonous as last week when I was ranking them all towards the top. As for this one, above the Ned Zone, but below Starship Poopers. Married to the Blob is fine. It's not that funny, Dr. Phil showing up is sort of entertaining, the ending is really morbid but overall it's not scary. The segment for me is mostly missing a certain X factor, it all feels very by the numbers. Homer gets hungry, starts eating people, turns into the Blob, and then just, it's over. In fact, you know what? This is going to be the newest addition to the bottom spot. I'm a bit worried as this goes on that I may start ranking these episodes lower out of boredom, but I'm pretty confident in my ability to still assess how I would feel about a segment even if I wasn't watching it in the midst of slogging through 100 of them. We'll see if that holds true throughout, though. You gotta know when to Golem is not that funny. There's a lot of Jewish humour which I don't really get. It's just that they have funny voices, right? That's the joke. It is weird that they make a joke about Krusty's show switching to HD, even though it wasn't until 2 seasons later that The Simpsons itself made the switch. The episode definitely isn't scary. It says a lot when this October marks 1 year since Jews ramped up their indiscriminate murdering of women and children and started committing war crimes on an unprecedented scale, and I still don't find them scary. In fact, I think I'm going to double up on my bottom placements and mark this one as the worst segment since the last one. It's still not bad, there's just nothing great about it. Fortunately, with The Day the Earth Looks Stupid, I can be a bit more complimentary. Also, isn't it weird that just after my little Palestine quip, we get an episode that ends with a direct parody of another imperialist power occupying an Arab country? Good news is, by this point, everyone agrees that was an immoral war. Sure is nice to be on the right side of history. Anyway, these segments for a while have been kind of failing to stick the landing, but here they really pulled it off. The idea that the aliens just get bogged down in a forever war with the insurgent native population is some evergreen political satire, depressingly. Also, this episode has some jokes that actually stand out.
Why don't I just punch you in the nose, bud?
Nosebud.
The old-timey vibe is really nice, they busted out the Fallout soundtrack and everything. With the way everyone just wantonly kills people, especially Homer, it does speak to how these segments have got a lot sillier. There's a lot more killing people on a whim as this series goes on. Anyway, this segment is an overall improvement, so I think I'll actually rate it below The Monkey's Paw, which interestingly also features an alien invasion. A funnier alien invasion, frankly, but still, this is refreshingly high ranking. And now we enter the final episode of this video and approach the halfway point of this little project. Anyway, this episode has one central joke. which is kind of an inversion of the aliens' first appearance. What if they were obviously evil, and the twist is that they are actually evil? Indeed here, their plan is to all move into a place and kill the people already living there.
It's because I'm Jewish.
Wow, the Simpsons writers really wanted to set me up to take some more shots at Israel. We're back to having a kind of weird ending in that the humans just show up and effortlessly kill the aliens after they've invaded, although I guess the aliens being either harmless or easily killable has been a quite common joke so far. Ultimately, there isn't much comedy here beyond the central joke of how obvious it is this alien wants to kill all humans and how oblivious the kids are to that, but this episode definitely isn't scary considering how easily they're defeated. Overall, this episode is pretty average. I'd say it's worse than Reaper Madness, but better than Married to the Blob. I quite enjoy Mr. and Mrs. Simpson. Obviously it's a parody of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I have also seen and since largely forgotten, but my basic memory is that it's about two assassins who are married, and that's what this is about. I think some of the jokes are pretty good because obviously it's playing off the two having marriage issues, which the writers have plenty of experience writing around. The focal point of the segment is the big fight they have in the middle, which isn't some brilliant feat of animation or anything, but it's definitely entertaining. So with this said, I'd rank it below Life's a Glitch and above The Island of Dr. Hibbert. Anyway, onto the final segment for this video. Heck House is quite neatly divided into two distinct sections. The kids pranking Springfield is pretty funny. I mean, it's not hilarious, I didn't laugh out loud or anything, we're way past that point, but it's fun. It then quite abruptly switches to being about Ned Flanders trying to scare the kids into behaving by showing them a vision of hell. Unfortunately, this section just feels a bit lackluster because it can't really be scary, so what does this achieve? Remember last video when I ranked The Devil and Homer Simpson kind of low? Well, I'm happy to report it's nearly in the upper half of episodes despite being almost right at the bottom at the end of last video. That's what you call a drop off in quality. And with that said, this Ned Flanders orchestrated tour of hell is much worse than the previous one, because at least that one was funny. This one just feels kind of lazy. Indeed, the first time I watched this episode, I remember feeling it was quite phoned in. Based on my enjoyment of the pranks at the beginning, I'll rank this just above Married to the Blob. So, we're now halfway through and we've seen a pretty stark contrast between these post-classic seasons and the classic era. The real question is, where do they go from here? Will we see a similar decline as we enter our first HD season next video? In fact, it's quite fun that the halfway point takes us exactly to the end of the 4x3 era. Anyway, remember to do all the algorithm things, subscribe for more videos in the future, and click this video on screen right now, which will probably be a link to the next part. Bye for now.